We'll go ahead and get underway here. We are recording, and we're here to have a conversation with our fearless broker and chairman of the board of the MLS about some information that came out. I believe everyone in our company got an email from Gary Keller this week. If you didn't, make sure that you are turned on to receive messages from KWRI. And or check your spam, your promotions, anything like that. Make sure you're getting those. And it was just him clarifying, like, hey, some changes are happening. NAR changed its policy on clear cooperation, and encouraging agents to use their voice and to get a really strong understanding of what's happening and what has the potential to happen. And so every time something changes in our industry, we want to be first to you all, so that you can lead the conversation for your clients. There's a lot of things flying around on social media. There's a lot of things, this hasn't hit the major news networks yet, but when it does, I'm sure you'll all have questions. And just like everything we dealt with last year, when we had our Zoom conversation about the lawsuits and the settlements and everything that came from that, we were about 4.5 months ahead of the fray, and felt, I would say, no disruption to business because we were able to stay ahead and keep our agents in the leadership position that they thrive in. We want to do the same thing here. So NAR has increased its flexibility, I think is the right terminology, around clear cooperation policies. And let's start just like, what exactly is clear cooperation, Andrew? It's been around for about 100 years. But what's the purpose of it?
Well, it's newer than you think. It's something that, in large part, especially for most agents at our brokerage, it never really mattered very much. It was a rule that didn't start getting enforced until the very beginning of 2020. Prior to that, the only rules that existed around these clear cooperation rules were just MLS rules about input, right? So basically, like, if you had a listing, you had to input within a certain amount of time. There was a time period where it was 72 hours. Our current rule is 48 hours. And there's also MLS rules that just say that you can't market a property that you don't have a listing agreement for. And therefore, if you have a listing agreement, you have to follow those rules around input. Now, what started to happen was brokers were kind of going around the edges on that and were not listing things in the MLS. So then clear cooperation was created to kind of go beyond MLS rules. And all clear cooperation does is change the deadline on how fast you have to put something in the MLS. So the rule since the beginning of 2020 has been that if you publicly market a property that you have a listing agreement for, that you have to put in the MLS within 1 business day. Where our MLS minimum number is 2 business days. So if you publicly market it, then clear cooperation kicked in. If you didn't publicly market it, you had 2 business days. That's been the rule since 2020. Clear cooperation in itself created a whole bunch of other problems for NAR and for MLSs, which is kind of why this has spiraled into the conversation we're having today. Clear cooperation spawned the first business practice antitrust lawsuits that were, not buyers and sellers, but real estate brokers saying that NAR policy was in violation of antitrust, meaning that discriminating against my business practices versus this other broker's business practices, and saying you can't do it this way and you can do it that way. That was the lawsuit from PLS, which is private or PSP, PLS, Private Listing Service, which was created by, I believe, a combination of a few brokers. The largest one with the largest mouthpiece being the agency, Umansky. But so that was the beginning, right? And then where we've landed more recently is NAR getting all this pressure about clear cooperation, and you've got brokers on one side saying clear cooperation is a violation of sellers' rights, property owners' rights, a violation of antitrust policy, just in discriminating against certain business practices amongst brokers. And then you have people on the other side saying clear cooperation is what's good for the consumer, and we're supposed to be advocates for the consumer. So it's
Yeah.
it's tough. The NAR is in the middle in kind of a hard spot, making a decision about kind of who's right and who's wrong. And they, what they came out with at the end of at the beginning of April was kind of like a very earth-shattering sounding answer that ultimately doesn't really change anything at all.
Yeah.
Clear cooperation was not changed at all. Just this other policy that we're going to talk about in a minute was added, and it was added as a choice. It's not mandated in any way. MLSs don't have to participate. Brokers don't have to use it. But they basically said, we need to create something that we can say is like, giving sellers choice, because clear cooperation, the argument is it's not giving sellers any choice to say, we don't want to be in the MLS for a period of time. We want to be privately marketed, and we want to be allowed to do that, which it's a little weird that a trade organization gets to tell a homeowner what they are or aren't allowed to do. The trouble is, I think most of us agree that it's not sellers who are deciding that. It's usually brokers and agents deciding that, kind of on their behalf.
So is this the multiple listing options for sellers? Is that the piece that is the new one?
Kind of, yeah. So I'm trying to think of the exact term. It's basically delayed marketing exempt listings.
Yes.
So, but what's been uncovered, and this is where we weren't super quick to come out and start saying things about this to our agents or anybody, because the fact is this has been kind of a moving target over the last 4 weeks, and still is, I would say. But when they first came out, the idea was it's going to be this like purgatory status that would be literally a new status in the MLS, where properties would go and they would be available, but they wouldn't go out in IDX feed. So they wouldn't go to any large portals at all. They would just be in the MLS for every member of the MLS to see. And this was one of the questions that was clarified weeks later, that it would go in MLS searches for the public. So if you had, one home searches set up for buyers, they would see those listings when they were in that status, versus not being able to see them until they were in like the more formal active status. So, and then NAR also came out and said that those houses in that status would be deemed and treated as active listings, from the standpoint of being available to be shown and sold, as opposed to like a coming soon status, which that was not the case. Coming soon was purely meant for like public pre-marketing, as opposed to available houses to be shown and sold. So it feels like it felt like a lot when it was first stated, and it's feeling like less and less. It's also feeling like it's maybe less and less, like it's so not different enough than what we currently do that it may ultimately not matter very much.
Yeah.
when this all plays out and everybody really understands what it is and what it isn't.
And so, in effect, the National Association of Realtors has created the opportunity for this. It's completely plausible, maybe not likely, but that an MLS might say, we're not going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's already happened. CRMLS, which is California's largest MLS, and I believe the largest MLS. It's either the first or the second largest MLS in the country. I'm not sure, by membership. They already came out and said they're not gonna they're not going to have this status.
So it'll be business as usual for the CRMLS.
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. And I think with or without this new status, it's going to be business as usual, truthfully.
Yeah.
I can tell you without, sharing anything that's confidential at the board level, I can tell you that, I mean, we're talking about it at our MLS. Pretty much everybody in the room decided that we are months away from making any kind of real decision about any actual changes, just because, again, this is like the understanding of what this is has already changed a few times just in the first month that it's existed. So we certainly want to make sure we don't have any kind of odd unintended consequences. So it's not something that we're at MLS Now going to act on fast at all.
Yeah. Does it feel similar to you as the conversation we were having last March whenever the news broke about the settlement, and then it was end of days for realtors and how was anybody ever going to earn a buyer's commission ever again? And by the time we got there, right, we were practiced, we were prepared, we updated documents, all these things happened, and then we had a really stellar back half of the year.
Yeah. The only difference is, I think in this case, like previously, that the issue there, like everybody with a license was in the same boat, rowing the same direction. And what's happening now is creating kind of like a fracture in our industry as to which side you're on, so to speak. And I think both sides are busy thinking all about what the other side's going to do that's terrible, instead of just like focusing on what they're going to do in their own business and move forward.
It sounds a lot like some real estate transactions that been part of it.
Yeah, like everybody's gearing up for the fight that's probably never going to happen, and just demonizing the other side for what they think they might do with the rule change.
Well, yes, and doing it all in the name of the consumer, right? Both sides are very clearly trying to do what is best for the consumer.
I mean, from their own stories, yes.
From their own story. Yeah.
I think it is important for us. Like we generally have a culture and a belief here that the best thing we can do is make our listings as available as we can to as many people as possible, and that's fine. But what that doesn't mean is if a person truly believes that doing it a different way is the way that they think is best, or that their client thinks is best, that makes them a bad person, because it doesn't. And it's okay. Like we can all still play together and be okay.
Yes. Buyers want to buy, sellers want to sell. We're here to help. There's a lot of stuff flying around. May 1st was a very important date because that was when Zillow supposedly changed everything.
Yeah, which I
want to talk a little bit about how they're playing in this whole conversation.
Yeah, and I think there's, Zillow has basically like decided to play chicken with the brokers who are on the side of wanting to decide what they do and don't want to share. Right. So the Compasses and the agencies of the world, which, really locally in Cleveland don't mean much of anything. There is one agency office in Cleveland that is, not really on our radar as somebody we're like concerned about what they're doing with their listings. But the fact is, Zillow just came out and said, if you're not going to share your listings publicly, then we don't want your listings, and we're not going to post them. Now, that was like a very broad statement that has since been, talked about with lots of detail in a bunch of different interviews with primarily Errol Samuelson from Zillow, who's, I don't know what his exact title is. He's like a chief something or other of industry development or something. But he's the one who's created this policy with Zillow. And as he digs into it more, it truly is a policy that is just in favor of clear cooperation policy. That's it. So the listings that won't land on Zillow ever, as long as they're listed with the same brokerage, are private listings that were marketed publicly. Zillow claims to have built some technology that's going to crawl the world and find these listings. I don't know how reasonable it is that they are or are not going to be able to police this. We'll find that out over time. I mean, we're 8 days in, 9 days in on that. So maybe this time next year, we'll have a better understanding of how frequently or infrequently they're, rooting out these listings that are being marketed somewhat publicly. And all that would mean, like, the best example of it I could think of would be, if you had a $2.5 million listing in Pepper Pike and you decided that you're going to have a broker's open and you're going to personally invite every agent that sold a listing over $1 million in the last 18 months to that broker's open, like, that would be public marketing, right? And somehow Zillow claims they're going to find out about these. And I don't know how well they'll do with that or not, but those are the only listings that they've been very clear about will not ever be allowed on Zillow after that. Because what tends to happen with private listings is they don't sell. And if that seller has an urgency to sell at some point, a lot of times I feel like pocket listings are pocket listings until it's not selling and a seller says, I need this house to be sold in the next 60 days so that I can do the next thing. Those listings, more than 70% of the time, end up in the MLS because they don't sell. And that number is obviously kind of an odd number because there's probably more that you don't ever hear about. But that's, the stats are clear, no matter who's providing them, that more listings don't sell than do sell in like private listing networks of any kind.
Yeah, I think it's in some way, shape, or form akin to what you see with FSBOs, right?
Yeah.
Over 80% of FSBOs end up listing with a realtor.
Yeah, and there's been some very strange things on Facebook. You say FSBOs, and it reminds me of it. That, I mean, there's agents on Facebook claiming that FSBOs won't be allowed on Zillow because they're like private listings, and that's entirely untrue. It may end up being untrue that listings that go in that delayed marketing exempt status still end up on Zillow, because again, that's the one piece, like, I have not heard in an interview Samuelson say specifically yes or no to that question. So
yeah,
he kind of like skirts the issue a little bit, I think, in part because I'm not sure that they want to commit to something or not. I could see that new status being used more like a coming soon than anything else. And if that's the case, I don't know why Zillow would be against it. Because those listings are still all going to land on Zillow after 3 days or 10 days or whatever. But that's the only thing that I still like. I've listened to 6 different interviews with him that were an hour long each, and none of them has the person interviewing him like specifically questioned him on that status and those listings. But the point that he makes over and over again is that the only listings that are going to get discriminated against by Zillow and Redfin, I believe, as well, and maybe others, is private listings that are marketed publicly. And that's it.
So right now in Northeast Ohio with our MLS, no change.
No, I mean,
discussion happening at the board level.
Yeah, the debt. It's odd there's a deadline, because if you're not going to make any change, I don't know what the hell the deadline's for. But there's a deadline of sometime in September. I don't recall when it is even.
I think it's the 30th. I think it's the end of September.
So like, theoretically, I think you'll probably start to see MLSs that are going to make changes make them in August and September. There's been some MLSs that hurried up and did things. I have no idea why anybody would do that. Just because, again, this is all very unclear. Our CEO at our MLS is still calling Jason Sanchez, who is the chairman of the MLS committee at NAR, and also the chairman of the what's the name of the other committee? It's basically like MLS issues. It's a separate committee that's been dealing. They're the ones who, I wouldn't say crafted the settlement, but they were the ones in the room with attorneys and things, kind of like dealing with that when they were dealing with that stuff, dealing with any CPP issues that have come up, and now this. So he's the guy basically, and people are still asking him questions that he doesn't have answers to about this. So that tells me that they don't totally even, they haven't thought through everything. And it's hard to do, right? I mean, once you do one thing, there's a bunch of other levers that nobody thought about that could get pulled. I mean, like now they've come out and said that the MLS could manipulate days on market or price changes during that time period. Counting them, not counting them, not showing original price during that time period, right? Like, let's say we have that during that time period, you're listed for 450, and then when you go active, you go to 415 because you weren't getting any phone calls at 450, that it wouldn't show that you had reduced it that $35,000 as a possibility. Not saying that that's, it's not like if you use that, then these are the rules around it. They're basically just saying, MLS, you decide, which will mean it will be different all over the country as to how it happens and what rules do or don't exist.
Yeah. And so, I mean, as you look at this from an MLS, like the things that will have to be decided by every MLS is how many days can you delay the marketing? How does days on market and price change history, get represented? What's the visibility during the delayed marketing period? And then what you're gonna do with the data. From a brokerage side, think about this, take off MLS hat, put on brokerage hat. Ultimately it's the seller's choice, right? If there was a delayed marketing status, that's a seller's choice. You think there's additional disclosures or representations that the seller understands what that means and to protect the agent? Like, are we thinking down the path right now?
So what's, if this status comes into existence in our marketplace with our MLS, the MLS will create a document similar to how the MLS has an opt-out document that you've got to use for a pocket listing, right? So a similar document to that will exist. I do not believe, from like the MLS standpoint, that they are going to let brokers create that document themselves and have their version of it. Doesn't mean that we couldn't or any broker couldn't have one, but it would mean if you were going to use that status, you'd have to use theirs as well. And I think the reason for that is probably obvious to a lot of us, that if you were to just look at, say, like EXP's already created one, it's out there in the world, you can go look at it online. If you were to compare EXP's delayed marketing addendum with Compass's disclosure about a 3-phase marketing plan, like, one is a warning label and the other one is a sales pitch. So we're not going to have a scenario where every broker gets to decide how they're going to disclose that to their sellers, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of regulating it in the first place.
Right. So, I mean, that's on the horizons. Do you see any other significant impacts on the brokerage side of things or the agent side of things as it relates beyond the disclosures and the increased optionality, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels like if some brokers in any given market area take advantage of this stuff in any kind of different way than they already are, that in itself will make other people feel like they have to, which is fine, but that's the way this will play out, right? I mean, if there are brokers in our market area that use this in such a way that they think it's to their benefit or their seller's benefit, and you start seeing it happen more often, whether that's pocket listings or this delayed market. I mean, to be clear, there's no different rules about pocket listings today than there was last month or the month before that. But if those things become more prevalent, then, like, by everybody else's nature, they want to also play those games because they think, well, if it's benefiting them, it'll benefit us. So, if we go down that path, um, then we'll there's going to be a lot of thinking to do and a lot of conversations to have, because that's going to be fragmented even inside of our brokerage.
Yeah.
There will be agents who think that that's advantageous for their clients and themselves, and there will be agents who don't. And we've got, by the nature of our size, we have a whole bunch of thought diversity around that, right? If we were 40 agents, we'd probably all think the same way, but we're not. So it may be something that becomes a real thing. I mean, in our marketplace, we've dealt with what feel like, moderately private listings from Howard Hanna for a long time. Are they going to continue to do it or do it differently? I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope it's interesting when you read articles. There's a bunch of articles from Hobie Hanna just recently because they finally settled their piece of the settlement, the commission lawsuit from last year. And he seems to make it pretty clear that he's against CPP, and he's not against brokers cooperating with each other. So, and you can have it both ways. You can be against being told what you have to do, and it's a one size fits all rule, and be for sharing things with other brokerage as opposed to never doing that at all, right? Because Howard Hanna definitely shares most of their listings with everybody in town. Otherwise, we would never sell them. So, I mean, it's there's two pieces to it. What their motivation truly is, we'll never know.
Yeah. Okay. So let's zoom into the now. Nothing's different that it was yesterday, and it won't be different tomorrow. At some point, it may be different. And that's, I mean, not likely, to be before June, July, August. I mean, September 30th is the deadline.
Before, I wouldn't say it's going to be before the end of August.
Yeah.
That would be the earliest, at least from the MLS.
So as an agent, like, I mean, if I'm on social media and I see this stuff about like Zillow just changed the game and, yada, 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 see me about private listings. How do you respond to that? Now broker hat off, agent hat on. Appreciate you bringing all your hats today. How do you respond to that? What do you say to your client who's like, hey, what's going on with this?
Well, I mean, I think the private listing conversation is the same conversation that's always been able to be had. I mean, it's from my perspective, it's a very simple question to somebody to say, like, that's great that this sounds interesting to you, that you think the possibility of having only a group of agents at one company be able to do the best, do better for you than every agent, doesn't sound reasonable. Like, would you prefer that we just only put a sign in your yard versus also do the other things that we do to make sure that the most possible ways for your house to be available are there, right? So I don't think that conversation changes at all. And honestly, I don't think we're going to see any more of it than we have before.
Yeah.
It's, that's a battle that in certain market areas around Cleveland has to be fought on a regular basis. And that's going to continue to happen. But those aren't new conversations for any of us that are regularly having to deal with it. I mean, there's a pocket on the east side and there's a pocket on the west side where those conversations are happening, and sellers are intrigued by it because of the stories they get told. And it's our job to make sure that they balance it with, are you sure that's a good idea?
I mean, our role remains throughout the client relationship to be an educator and to help them make the best possible decisions. And if they, it's no different than pricing the home. How many times is the seller insisted that the price is what they think it is, not what I think it is or you think it is. And, we have obedience to the seller.
But in the same, no different than pricing, also
Yeah.
the fact that they could meet with three agents and get told 600, 675, and 725, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's a pretty big gap. Right?
Yeah. But I think that's if we're leaving this with hey, what do I do with this information that Andrew just gave me? Just, when the time comes, when you face it, be prepared to educate your client on what it means, how it impacts the eyeballs, and whatever their motivation is, make sure they understand how their options would impact that motivation. And then as things change, we'll have more conversation. If things change, we'll have more conversations like this to make sure that we're having those conversations in the most ethical and accurate ways with our clients.
Yeah. I do want to make one thing clear because this was brought up in numerous conversations I've had that like this new status proposal by NAR. This is a status that already exists in our MLS today, and it's just the drop down box that says internet. You can say yes or no. If you said no, that's the same thing as the new status. So we could already do it. You could already have a listing that you could start off by turning off the internet and just saying, okay, this is only going to be amongst us as agents and people with a one home search setup, and it's not going to go to any portals. So I mean that it already happens or could happen, but we made a status for it.
All right. Before we open it up for questions, because I don't want to give anybody the opportunity to seek clarity here. Andrew, do you know why they're called pocket listings?
Is this a joke?
No, this is
okay.
Do you know why?
Because it's hard to see what's in somebody's pocket, right? I mean, it's something only they know about and the people they tell.
They used to be that the MLS would come out on one day each month, and it was a printed book. And then if you listed a home prior to the next book coming out, but after this month's book came out, you'd get an MLS printout. And that was the listing. It was the same page that will be in the book next month. So what folks who wanted to be savvy and double side deals would do, or attempt to, is they'd wait until, say, June 2nd to list the house. It wouldn't be in the book. They'd get the printout, they'd fold it up, and they'd put it in their pocket. So when they would meet with buyers, there's everything in the book, and here are my pocket listings.
Interesting. It's like the same thing that happens today when people just take listings on that start on Friday, then they don't have to go on the MLS until Monday instead of Saturday.
Yeah.
Mike, I unmuted for a minute. You guys, I have somebody gifted me one time. This is a book from 1972. This is the MLS in Berkeley and Oakland, California. And you could open it up and you could see the photos and the prices. And this was the MLS. And so I guess to Mike's point, if you wanted a pocket listing, you would, and I was just trying to imagine, like, how often did they print that? Oh, the week. It was for the week.
For the week.
So if you wanted a pocket listing, you could rip your page out and carry it around in your pocket.
You used to have to drive down to the MLS and pick those up. That's cool. That's a cool piece of memorabilia there. Well, now that anybody else who wants to drop into the chat or unmute, ask a question, seek clarity. Again, this is kind of feels like a nothing burger. That's probably a good thing. And as it continues to evolve, we'll continue to stay in front of it. But what else do we need to clear up for you today?
There is Jen Rubel had asked this question earlier when we were talking. Is there a time limit for non-IDX? That is to be determined by the MLS.
So how long that delay period is? Like our MLS could say it's 72 hours or it's a week.
Yeah, it could be 100 days. You can make it whatever you want. Yeah.
Hey, it's Jen. Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Okay, so if, stating that we have the option now by doing non-internet. So if this comes about and, our MLS adopts this policy and we decide to, non-IDX, whatever, however you want to say it, who would see it? Any member of the MLS or just any member of the MLS that's in your brokerage?
Anybody that's a member of the MLS, as well as buyer searches on One Home, because that's just the consumer side of the MLS. So they see everything as well.
So if Howard Hanna searches it, they see it.
Yes.
Okay, so it just keeps it off of
Just keeps it
Realtor,
off
Home.
the portals,
Got it.
and keeps it off of every other website. Like, it wouldn't be on anybody's website. You are allowed to, if you're the listing broker, you can have it on your site, and the MLS can do that, can make it so it just goes to, so if it's our listing, it could go on just our website and wouldn't go to anybody else's. That's the only other place it goes. Now, there is a caveat to that, and that has to do with virtual offices, virtual office websites in that scenario. And this is why I think ultimately Zillow will be okay with using this status, is these listings have to be available to virtual office websites, because then those have to be registered to be able to see. Therefore, all Zillow would have to do is add a virtual office website piece to their existing website, and then all of those listings would be on their website. Because they're a broker, they're allowed to have a virtual office website. But then you wouldn't see them on Zillow unless you registered, and then you would see them. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I'm just, I guess, maybe supplying some information that's extra.
So one last question. What is, this is just playing devil's advocate. In what way could this ever benefit, except for the rare person who, is, very private and, doesn't want to publicly market their house, which, whatever. Like, how could this possibly benefit the seller to opt out?
When you say opt out, do you mean opt out of the MLS, or do you mean use the delayed marketing period?
Use the delayed marketing period.
Okay. I think there's in my head, as I heard this and I've thought about it, I think there's two scenarios that make a lot of sense. One is using the delayed marketing period basically just as like coming soon.
To generate interest.
Yeah, which that may ultimately be all this ever turns into, is just for MLSs that don't have coming soon anymore, we've got it again, right? That may be all it ends up being. I don't know. And then the other scenario is, and this is a similar thing to things that like Hobie Hanna says in every interview, is like, how does it benefit a seller to have some agent from 2 counties over receive a lead from realtor.com and then show up and show their house and not know anything about the neighborhood or anything at all, because they're from 45 minutes away and they just happen to be the next person on the round robin that's getting leads from some website. And there's some truth to that. I mean, I think about it, when we're in multiple offers, one of the things that we say as a buyer's agent to the listing agent is,
I have no idea
how we know the buyer, and how that makes them more credible because we are certain that they are legitimate.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, I think and so in that delayed marketing period, if it's just going to be an active listing that just basically all the buyers who know about it aren't sold leads, that may not be so bad for a seller.
Got it.
So, but those are the only two that I've come up with that I think would be like, a legitimate argument for the use, or a legitimate type of use of the status.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Question, since you were talking about Zillow leads, how many sales really come from Zillow leads? Has anybody ever tracked that, as opposed to, agents who are referral and don't buy leads?
I don't know. We have to ask ask the Supreme team about that. There are teams around our market and around the country that sell hundreds of homes, of which at least half of them are Zillow Flex leads.
Well, I've listened to people who are good
Yeah.
at converting Zillow leads, and it is magical. But it would just be interesting because we all seem to be talking about, we all spend so much conversation talking about buying leads, but really what percent of the sales that actually close are Zillow leads? I'm
Yeah.
not saying they're good or bad. I was just curious.
There's really no
Yeah.
good way to know that number because it's not reported anywhere. The agents who are selling those don't. I mean, Zillow would be able to tell you how many referral fees they collected now that they're doing it mainly on referral fee basis. So they would have that number. That would be an obvious number, but I doubt they would hand that data out freely. But
the closest I've ever got to it, and it's survey data, so how trustworthy that is subject to the survey. But the National Association of Realtors releases annually their home buyers and sellers report. And in the conversation around where people meet their agent, it is in the high single digits that it is the internet. Now, that is not exclusively Zillow. That's the whole of the internet. So if, let's say it's 10%, that's 4,500 homes, 5,000 homes in our MLS last year. That's Realtor.com, Trulia, Zillow, OpCity, all of those things. Whether or not that is accurately reported by the consumer is probably the biggest challenge. When it comes to selling leads in that conversation, it was, I think in 2021, Zillow sold 121 million leads. There were only 6 million homes sold. And so like they're just, same lead gets sold a dozen times. And or that lead could get sold a dozen times and that person lists with their brother-in-law. And so that's, there is a, like anything, I was told by an agent today that you just, open houses are dead. You can't get any business at an open house. It just, it's like we're all good at some things and not good at others. And some people are lead eaters and some people are open householders and some people just will have built great careers over decades working with FSBOs. And so, to each their own. And the weight that Zillow has in the conversation is interesting. And still waiting to see them post a profitable quarter. What other questions do we have?
Andrew, Jeremy here. Is there has there been any action or thought or movement on what you mentioned earlier, like Howard Hanna, for instance? We know it's a common practice on the West Side. List a home on a Friday. Oh, it doesn't go in the MLS because there's no way to input it until staff comes in Monday morning to input it. Now that we have, internet, you can do it from your phone. But has there been any discussions on addressing that, changing that? Because they're, often selling the home at an open house and, those homes aren't made public. So has that been addressed or talked about, or is it?
No, I mean, none of the existing rules are being broken. Clear cooperation is one business day, which NAR makes it pretty clear that business days are Monday through Friday and not bank holidays. So I think we're getting closer to a point where we could make that time limit include weekends or make it shorter, but I still think that there's a very small reality to that. Like very, very few houses are not going in the MLS and then having an open house, that they're just basically putting it on Facebook and putting a sign in the yard and letting their own office know about it. Like I think that happens in some very small spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of that, but I wouldn't think it's reasonable for an MLS to tell their clients, brokers, hey, you have to have all your listings in the MLS the same day that the listing starts. Because they'll make the argument that, like, you know, in our office, half the agents have their listings input by these admin people, and those admin people work on, you know, work Monday through Friday. So if this listing starts on Friday, it's not realistic that it's going to get input on Friday. And I don't think that it's reasonable for the MLS to say, hey, well, you figure it out, hire people to work on the weekend or whatever. I don't know that that's going to come. We might get to 24 hours, but that 24 hours is still going to be business days, just like Clear Cooperation is.
Yeah.
Which would still
Right.
mean Friday is Monday.
Right.
Yeah, if I could get a data set, you could probably figure out pretty quickly how many that happened with. I mean, there were 60,000 listings, and we all know of one or two where we got burned on it, or we didn't have the opportunity, or we saw it. But it's not half the listings going in the MLS that way, right?
No, not half by any means, but it's just
Oh, no.
embarrassing when it does happen and you don't have access to it, and you're
Yeah.
finding out from a client says, you know, why didn't we know about this? My aunt told me about it, or, you know.
Yeah. No, yeah.
One thing I think we have to be careful of when it comes to rules, I talked about this, I forget where I was, maybe it was at an ACAR board meeting or something, I can't remember where. You know, this exact thing came up, and I said, you know, there's no perfect answer, and I think we need to be awfully careful as an industry about making rules that are to our benefit. And I think a lot of times rules around input ultimately are for our benefit, not even for a consumer's benefit. It's so that we can make it a level playing field for us as agents. And we're like completely excluding the fact that like our rules should be about making sure that we're operating as good agents for the public, not creating rules to make sure that we are like protecting ourselves or giving ourselves as much opportunity as possible. I think we just have to be careful with that. And this is the one place where most of the time when people are complaining about this or getting upset about this agent's doing this all the time, or this, I saw this happen, like so often the reason for that has nothing to do with like the protection of any consumer. And it's just like the whole point of exercising the rule is to protect our own business, which is usually a loser to start from that basis as the thing we want to make rules for.
Pardon me, but it sounds like we do need rules though. and I appreciate that what you just said, Andrew. But Jeremy's just pointed out that some people don't necessarily, you know, they push the edge of those rules. And I like to think that we're all, you know, that we are always concerned about our consumers. That's our number one rule. The cardinal rule should be to do right by our consumers, and whether they're our clients or somebody else's clients. But it sounds like that's why we have laws, and that's why we have rules, so that we can police the people, the few, Mike, to your point, the few people who are skirting the rules or pushing the boundaries, pushing the edges of the rules. All that said, I am curious about, because I do speak with a lot of clients who have had experience with the Howard Hanna lack of clear cooperation, and have, you know, come to deals with cash, and have been shut out of deals, so that Howard Hanna is doing more and more of these in-house deals. I'm just curious if any of this is going to have any impact whatsoever. Is it ultimately going to become, a consumer thing, a lawsuit, or is this the marketplace going to flesh out bad behavior on behalf of the consumer?
If anything, the direction, like the direction NAR is going, is creating more opportunity for less cooperation. Right? I mean, that's the direction of the recent addition to the policy, right? So just on its face, that's the direction it's going. Now, again, the only reason that they're doing this is to try and so they didn't change clear cooperation. They added another thing around it, right? Didn't actually change the core of what it is. And I think that like you have to like make sure you're clear with yourself about what NAR is at this point, right? They are like a very beat up soul trying desperately to make it to the end of the fight, right? So they're making policies that they think are good for the industry, but ultimately good for them to stay in business, right?
Yeah.
And the thing they don't want is to get sued for antitrust violations around clear cooperation.
Yeah.
So take it for what it is, right? They're not at this moment in time. I think from like a legislative standpoint, they're the same organization they always were for us. From like a rules standpoint, they're not. They're just not. That's not their goal right now. Right, their goal is preservation more than anything else.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Maybe for the good. I'm not sure that NAR is like this perfect rule dictator all the time. Because markets are different too. Like the rules and the way the game gets played here versus Dallas versus San Diego versus Madison, Wisconsin are all going to be different. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We all kind of seek our own level, and our marketplaces determine what's good, what's bad, what's going to be appropriate, what's going to be liked, what's going to be disliked. I mean, that's the nature of us being as big as we are as a country, right? So it's pretty hard for one organization to make all the rules all the time that are going to work for everybody.
Right. Yeah, I get the feeling that all of this, like what we just went through this last year, it just works itself out, right? We're going to see some changes. I think, to be honest, with all of our clients, all of our people, let them know what's going on, and be clear about how you feel about it, like what you think is important for them. Is always going to be the best approach, right? You tell them what you really think is how this could hurt you or how this could help you, and then see where it goes.
Yeah. And the one thing I would say, I think like the more this kind of stuff is in the news, the less amount of people will be in agreement with the idea that making my house available to less people is valuable.
It doesn't make any sense.
Part of the reason that's been able to work for a long time is because there's been no light shined on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and this is my point. I want to say two things about this right away. First of all, you're wearing a lot of green today. Secondly, I think it's important that we point that out in the marketplace whenever given the opportunity, to tell the marketplace, this is what our competition does, or this is what we're seeing in this marketplace with these rules or these changes and such. Because really, exposure is going to result in the best price for our people. Period. It's as simple as that.
We are at our best as educators. Having a conversation with an agent maybe 10 days ago, and they made the comment that they treat all of their first-time home buyers like they're the real estate agent doing their first transaction. That's the way that they explain the process to them, as though they were going to have to go do this a dozen more times in that year, because then you can't assume anything. And same thing with any consumer. When we start to break things down to that level of explanation, the outcomes are overwhelmingly positive, and we get closer in relationship with people, right? That's how trust is formed, and that's why people would choose us versus like the don't worry about it, it's what's best for you model, which some others may use.
Sorry about the green comment, but couldn't resist.
All right.
Let's see. We got one question here in the chat, and it says, what seller ever said it would be, oh, it's not a question. Whatever said be best to minimize my exposure. Yeah. Few and far between.
I think it's important when we're talking to buyers where something has not gotten to them and sold before it gets to them, that we don't talk negatively about our industry, but to say every seller is given a choice. It could be when we sell your house, Michael, that you may decide you don't want people to come through. So you just want to open it up to a few people and sell it for whatever it sells for. And that's your right. Right. So if we're working with buyers that this is going to happen, it's going to happen. Right. It's important that we explain it in a positive way for our industry and not that our competitors do this. Because I put a listing on the other day that, our sellers said, hey, if you have any buyers before it goes on, can you bring them in? We did. They chose not to buy it, but that's what they asked us to do. Right. So anyway, it's just, we have to be just kind of be careful how we talk to buyers about this, and keep our industry in a positive light. That's all yeah.
Yeah. As one of the, I forget which section of the canon of ethics states that we will not disparage other licensees and brokerages.
Yeah.
And we can't be
Reminder.
whiny little babies.
Right. And we don't know, we don't know someone's story.
Yeah.
We don't know the seller's story whose house sold before it got out to everyone.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the other side of it, I think.
Yeah.
Agree, Terry, with you. I think it's Article 12, Andrew, but I agree with you. But I do think, though, that we could help ourselves with, though, is like we could, without disclosing information that we can't legally disclose, that our sellers don't want us to disclose, but we could say things like the seller has requested, like explain at least in the moment to that. You don't have to make it public or put it in the broker's comments, but I think sometimes it looks like, and it can appear that we as listing agents, or even from the buyer's agent perspective, are doing something that either we shouldn't, or isn't illegal, but isn't maybe above board, or seems like we're doing something because there's no explanation, or at least framework behind it that we could have easily explained, and made, without disclosing too much, and made it clear as to why it is that way. And I think that helps the industry as a whole, because there's just more transparency there when allowed, and when we're not breaking confidentiality. But we don't take the extra time to explain that, or to leave a message, or to just frame it in as to why that is. And I just think that it, doesn't, it can make people feel certain ways and think certain things that they shouldn't. And then that's when the disparaging comments come, and where, as Allison said, we kind of lower our our opinions of each other. But I just think with a little bit of explanation, just brief and high level things, that just takes a little extra time to even leave a text explanation, I think is just so good.
Yeah.
It would be good. Who was that speaking, please?
It's
Lisa
Lisa
Cisco.
Cisco.
I thought it was you. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll put a pin in that, and we're here at the top of the hour at 3:00. Every time we have a conversation with our broker, we do a broker update. Andrew does a really great job of rooting his lessons learned or his advice in the belief system of our company, the Y4C2Ts. And with that, what's your favorite one, Andrew? It's one you always talk about: communication. Seek first to understand.
Yeah, baby.
And I think, Andrew and myself and the rest of the leadership team are working hard to understand what's coming for all of you. Just as you work hard to understand your clients' needs and deliver on them. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to grow and win in this market and the next one. So appreciate everybody hopping on here. If you have additional questions, comments, concerns, smart remarks, or physical threats, you can direct them to either of us offline. And saw Elliot like that. Elliot probably teeing up a physical threat right now. Thank you for being here, guys. Have a great weekend. Enjoy what appears to be a beautiful one here in Cleveland, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you.